All right, welcome everyone. I'm Lauren O'Brien, the Chief Revenue Officer of Cloudastructure, and I'm super excited about this webinar today. We have a great audience and we have great panelists. Our topic today is investing in AI. As interested investors in AI, I'm sure you want to know what it is to look for. You know, what are the pros and the cons and things you need to consider. And so that is what we'll be talking about today. Done. Okay, but before we get into that, I'm just going to pause for a few seconds here and let you all read our legal disclaimer, and then we'll move on. Hopefully you're fast readers. If not, Kathleen will put a link in the chat and you guys can read that as well. All right. So I'll lead with some introductions, and then we will have a nice banter between Rick and Chris in terms of what they think are the must-haves in terms of an AI investment. It'll sure be an interesting conversation between the two, and then we will kind of present the overall scorecard. And then, of course, we want to hear from you. What are your questions? You know, I'm sure you have some questions about what to invest in. And how, and would like to hear from you for the rest of the conversation. So before I get started, wanted to welcome Rick Bentley, founder and CEO of Cloudastructure, and Chris Lustrino, the founder, CEO, and editor of KingsCrowd. So thank you guys for being here. And Rick, do you want to tell us a little bit about Cloudastructure? Because I know we have some new folks here today.
Sure, yeah. So Cloudastructure does video surveillance in the cloud. So we push all the video to the cloud. That way, if the building blows up or burns down, or someone comes in and says, give me the recordings, all the recordings are safely offsite in the cloud. Once we did that, we realized because the recordings were in the cloud, we had access to pretty large computational clusters that could do a lot of interesting things like computer vision on all the video. So just like Google indexed the web, so you can search the web, we index the video, so you can search the video. You can say, show me all the cars, all the backpacks, all the red cars, all the Laurens with a dog, whatever it is you're looking for.
All right. And then here we have KingsCrowd. Why don't you tell us a little bit about KingsCrowd, Chris?
Absolutely. Wonderful to be with all of you here today. So for those who don't know us, you know, if you're an investor in Cloudastructure or any other startup that you've invested in on platforms like Republic, WeFund, or Start Engine, Dealmaker, so on and so forth, KingsCrowd is very much your Bloomberg-like solution for tracking what we define as the online private markets or the equity crowdfunding markets. We track and rate 100% of equity crowdfunding deals, whether it be Reg CF, Reg A+, Reg D 506C, and we provide quantified ratings on 100% of companies that are raising capital in these markets to help you, the investor, make informed investment decisions. We've been doing that for over 5 years now. We've rated over 6,000 companies representing tens and tens of billions of dollars of value, and are getting pretty good at what we do. So anyway, we'll have a little coupon offer for you later, but if you want to check us out, we're always happy to be helpful to investors to make informed investment decisions in this space.
Terrific. All right, so let's take it away. Chris, ask Rick about his must-haves.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure, you know, a lot of us are very interested in kind of the latest movement that's out there, right? Artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, and it's created this whole new movement that feels like just in a matter of weeks has completely transformed the dialogue in the startup community. Personally, I'm kind of happy about it because I was a little tired of hearing about things like Web3 that just from my perspective, I'm not sure are all that real. But I think the AI movement is very much a real one that we need to be paying attention to. And so I'm looking forward to having this conversation here with Rick, who is obviously an expert in the space. So Rick, as we get into it, let's talk about some of the key things that you look for when you're considering making an AI investment now that this space is completely taking off. What are the key things that you care about? And I'm happy to see the first one is revenue model. So obviously that can mean a whole lot of things. What do you mean when you say that you need the right revenue model in place? What are you thinking on that front?
Yeah, well, I'd say first of all, you need a revenue model, right? Before you even get to the right one. You look at Microsoft, Facebook, and Google, and they've put a lot of money into their large language model chatbots, right? Facebook also just put a lot of money into virtual reality, and there wasn't a model there either for them, right? You know, these are big players. You can go and buy their stock, you know, on a public exchange anytime you want. But you know, OpenAI is interesting because it's now licensing out ChatGPT, and it's got all these controls you can put around it. So you can make a chatbot of any flavor you want. You can make it any political leaning you want, almost. That's within restrictions. It's just very interesting how they've got that monetized now. You started out as a not-for-profit basically, and turned into probably the best business model, best revenue model.
Now, question for you: when you think about revenue models that could exist in this space, right? Like, is the creating the AI bot, is that already done? Is OpenAI just like the bot, and now it's really about building things on top of data sets or whatever it may be in the application of AI? Or is there still room for people to create the literal AI bots?
Well, I think there's room for some very big players to create AI bots, and there's probably room for some open source movements to get a lot of traction. You know, we see it again and again. The first real startup I did was called Televoke. After a merge and a rename, it became Jakarta, got bought by Uber. It was backed by SoftBank. It was a big .com boom kind of time, right? And in the .com boom, the technology was a database-backed website, right? Yeah. And with a database-backed website, you could build anything you wanted to. Hey, look, no one's done pet food before. Let's do pets.com, right? Hey, no one's done this before. No one's done that before. And people just ran into this big empty field, and a lot of people survived. You know, a lot of social media companies sprung up and survived. Facebook came out of that, right? Google came out of that. And a lot of them, like pets.com, failed, right? So people are running in, trying to figure out what sort of stake they can claim and what sort of revenue model they can get. And some are going to make it and some aren't. But I think there's plenty of room for the underlying technology. So, you know, back then, it was Sun Spark stations running Unix before there was a Linux, which was open source, right? And it was Oracle database on the back end of everything before it went to MySQL and Postgres and all these other free versions, free flavors of the same thing, right? So yeah, ChatGPT is the one everyone knows about right now. Everyone's hopping on, but you know, there's a lot more instances of Linux right now than there is of Sun Spark stations, right? So I still think the open source stuff can come up and eclipse anything that's going on right now. Still too early to say.
And one other question I want to ask you is, when you're thinking about these revenue models, is there a couple that come to mind that you think are the most attractive? And I'll just give you one real quick example. For me, one that I think about is kind of like this consultancy service idea where you're an expert in a thing. You now apply AI instead of hiring 10 people. It's basically you and your AI bot making a dramatic amount of money that's highly, highly profitable. That to me is actually kind of exciting. Suddenly consultancy could be a very scalable business, but I'm curious to hear if there's any that stick out to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, in the .com boom, my roommate worked at Scient. If you don't know the story, Google it. $1 billion unicorn to help all the venture-backed companies in Silicon Valley make their new products a reality, and made crazy money, and we're out of business, you know, 18 months after the bust, right? But you know, I just look, for me right now, it's a land grab, right? There's going to be a lot of first mover advantage. Craigslist is still a thing, right? It's a web 1.0 interface. It's not sexy. It still works great. People use it a lot, right? You know, they didn't need to take it public. They can just sit back and mint money off of that, right? There's going to be a lot of first mover advantages here, picking up revenue models we haven't thought of before. It's also going to be interesting to see what sort of allergic reaction, you know, immune response a lot of these service providers you may have been talking about come up with, right? If you go to ChatGPT for medical advice, hey, I just hurt my knee, what do I do? Or, oh my God, I've been shot, right? You know, how soon before it says, I am not a licensed medical professional in your state and can't give you an answer, right? How long before you ask a legal question, it says, I'm not licensed to practice law in your state, right? How long before these trade unions all kind of circle the wagons and say, oh, you got to shut that off. That's our domain only. And then how long after that until it aces the bar exam, in every state.
Cost-effective lawyers. I like the sound of
Right?
that.
Let me know when you find one.
So does the company own the customer, or is there AI someone else's cost center? I'm curious to hear what you mean by this and what this looks like.
Yeah, so we see this again and again. So I'll take our field, for example, video surveillance, right? If we walked in and said, hey, we've got great computer vision for video surveillance, people go, that's awesome. But we don't have an end-to-end solution, so we can't sell it to the end user. We've got this piece of technology we can insert in someone else's product, right? So let's say we went to someone who made video recorders and said, we want to put our technology in your recorders. They would go out and sell those recorders to the end users. And they would come back to us and go, your license is kind of expensive. Can we get it lower? As we sell more of these, can we get it lower? Hey, we talked to one of your competitors and they say they got the same thing you got pretty much, but they sell it for half as much. So we need to get your price lower, right? You're just someone else's cost center. You're just getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until you're squeezed out, right? When you own the customer, you're making the sale saying, hey, look, here's what we do. And it's got this great AI in the middle of it, right? And this is the value proposition here. You're not getting squeezed out anymore, right? You're showing that you're bringing the value to the chain. And so I just think that's a really important thing to think about. There's a lot of middleware out there, just like there was back in the .com boom, that is not going to be there next week, right?
Yeah.
And it may very likely be open sourced.
Understood. No, that actually makes a lot of sense. I definitely see where you're coming from with that. Now, the next one's kind of funny, and I'm really curious to get your thoughts on it. So you say manual machine learning. Now, it's interesting because I was actually recently reading about X.AI, which was like a very early days AI company in the world of AI, right? I think it came out in like 2012, 2013. And they ended up selling it, I think, for a pretty minuscule amount of money. And what the founder said was like, we were too early. And the reality was like most of our business, like it was supposed to like help you schedule meetings and stuff. It was basically human run because they didn't have enough data to actually like automate it and make it work. So there was a lot of people actually doing this stuff. And I don't think that was uncommon in the mid 2000s for people to be doing that when they said it was AI driven. It was actually like 80% human driven. But now we're moving into a new world. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what manual machine learning means.
Yeah. So have you heard the term Mechanical Turk before?
I have. Yep.
Do you know where it comes from?
I actually heard the story once, but you're going to have to remind me.
It's the very first chess computer. Before there was computers, this guy built a chess computer. And you could sit down and the pieces would move, right? And it would play a great game of chess. You would move your piece, it would move its piece, and it was a fantastic chess player. And the way this guy made it was he had a Turkish chess grandmaster upside down under the table playing right the chess game from underneath, right? And so that was the first artificial intelligence, if you want to think of it that way, right? They were obfuscating the human. I think it's a little bit what you're talking about. When you have humans actually doing the AI, right? It's not really artificial anymore, right? What I'm talking about here in artisanal, versus TensorFlow, or manual versus machine learning. There's all kinds of AI out there, and the question then is, what's powering it? What's behind it, right? I'll use computer vision as an example again. Just 5 years ago, if you wanted, 8 years ago, if you wanted to have a computer detect when a car came onto the screen, right? You had to try to explain to a computer what a car looked like. It's like, well, it's got these, black things that are round down at the bottom called tires, and they're kind of rounded on top and they're sort of shiny. And sometimes the lights in the front are white, on the back, sometimes they're red, on the side, sometimes they're yellow, right? And you go into like all this stuff to try to explain to a computer what a car looks like. You just do a horrible job. And then you try and refine it over time. It just never works that great, right? Well, I was working at Google full time in 2015 when we open sourced TensorFlow. That was really the first machine learning platform that anyone could just grab and start working with. And with a machine learning application like TensorFlow, you take 10,000 pictures of cars and 50,000 pictures of not cars, mailboxes, motorcycles, airplanes, things that may be confusingly similar to the computer, right? And you let it do its thing, and it comes back and it does a better job of detecting cars than you could ever explain to it manually, right? Just like the chess computer now outplays every human, including that Turkish grandmaster on his back underneath, right? So what I mean by that is it really using machine learning based, or is it, to your point of view, or to your point, the people, the wizard behind the curtain, right?
Yep. Now, can you explain for those who aren't as privy to this stuff what artisanal computer vision is?
Yeah, so artisanal is just like the original chatbots were artisanal, and that means an artist built them, right? So fancy word for a human did it, right?
Got it.
But your first chatbots were, okay, well, hi, my name is Chatbot, right?
Yeah.
How are you today? Oh, if the person says good, fine, or maybe I find a thesaurus for everything around good, then I answer this, and I find a thesaurus for everything around bad. But then they tell me to screw off. Okay, I need another set of stuff for that. And they ask me a different question instead of answering my question. How do I handle that flow? And people would try and build these chatbots to handle all these things. Some of them are really quite good, right? Some are really quite good, but they're nothing like the ChatGPTs of today, right? And that's because it was artisanal versus machine learning, right?
Got it. So in one instance with artisanal, basically you're telling it what to say, and you might try and get really nuanced about it and try and think of every situation your little bot might run into. But at the end of the day, you're really force feeding it what you want it to say versus TensorFlow. It actually learns what to say.
Yep.
And so it's actually evolving over time and getting smarter, and which is why it could also be dangerous, which we'll get into in a minute. But it's literally like, in a scary way, creating a little human computer to almost think for itself and learn on its own rather than you just force feeding or spoon feeding. Here's what you should say next.
Exactly. Yeah, was it built by hand, or is it really built off of big data?
Yeah, I just want to jump in here for the investors in the room, but if I'm an investor, then how can I tell, right? If someone's doing manual or machine learning?
Yeah, well, if you're looking to invest in AI, if they're doing machine learning at this point, they're going to tell you, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a hot button. But
Yeah.
that's really where the revolution is right now, right? Is that it is machine learning based AI.
Yep, I completely agree. And yeah, I think to your point, if we think about some of those old school, more artisanal computer vision would be like your drifts, right? If anyone knows Drift, it was like one of the first chatbot tools that you could apply to any website. And basically you would provide a bunch of prompts about how to respond to different situations, but it wasn't smart. The bot wasn't learning and getting smarter. It was literally just following prompts. I love it. I mean, it's a really, really interesting and valuable concept. So, okay, last one on this list here is supervised versus unsupervised learning. What does that mean to you? And then actually to Lauren's point, how should folks think about assessing this when looking at a potential AI investment?
Yeah, well, this is where it comes full circle, right? If you just let the machine go off on its own, it can come back with some crazy stuff. I have another slide. Anyone remember Microsoft Tay?
I personally do.
Yeah, that was the first, hey, machine learning based chatbot, right? We're just gonna turn it loose on Reddit and the web and forums and everywhere else, and it's going to come back and people can talk to it, and it's going to learn from every conversation that people have with it, right? And we're just going to let it do its thing, and we're going to make this, this artificial intelligence. And people started feeding it garbage, and it started spitting out garbage back really fast, and without any supervision, it went off the rails pretty quick. I'm not even going to say some of these things out loud, but it went from hello world to Hitler was right in about 16 hours, right? It was just horrible, right? There's just no other way around it. So some of the stuff is spat out was just absolutely shocking. So if you play with ChatGPT, you can tell it's been very finely curated, right? Almost to a fault, by the way. I'll get to that in a second. But in computer vision, when we do supervised learning, if you just feed all those, remember I said here's 10,000 pictures of cars and 50,000 pictures that aren't cars.
Mm-hmm.
it can still decide that, man, this boat is a car, right? And every time it's going to come back as a car. And unless someone goes and goes, no, dummy, that's a boat, right? Where we really see that is with face recognition. So we set up a system for a customer. They've got a bunch of locations. They've got a bunch of employees that are coming and going. We grab everyone's face. We put those faces in clusters that look alike, right? But Chris, one day under the right light, you and I look a lot alike, and it gets a little confused, or things are a little overlapped right now, right? But if someone just goes through and goes, no, that's Rick and that's Chris, like one time, it is now so much more accurate than we could ever make it just off of an unsupervised learning system, right?
Got it.
So anything you're going to look to invest in, there's got to be a human in the loop, so to speak, human in the loop somewhere that, you know, helps guide this thing to the outcome that matches your business case, right? Now, I said this can happen to a fault, and you know, ChatGPT is interesting. People have discovered what a lot of this kind of nuanced personality of ChatGPT has been given, and they've found ways to uncover it. And then the humans come back and hide their tracks, right? So in the early days of ChatGPT, you could say, "Tell me a joke about a man," right? And say, why do men often forget? You know, because their wives are always there to remind them of something, right? And you say, "Tell me a joke about a woman," and say, "I am programmed not to be sexist. I won't tell you a joke about a woman," right? And you're like, oh, there's this interesting kind of political bias in it, right? You could say, rank the following on a scale of 1 to 10 on best for society and worst for society: Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Fox News, CNN, right? And the conservative stuff is at the bottom, and the left wing stuff is at the top, right? And that became very easy for people to discover with questions like that. And they've since shut down those responses so the bias isn't as obvious, right? So, but that matches their business case very well, right? They're doing it to maximize income and not get canceled and everything else. And so they're doing a very logical thing, I think. But it has to have supervised learning, and sometimes it'll be done to a fault. But you can't get by without supervised learning.
Yeah, it's a scary world. I know that Sam Altman has talked a lot about it, and like this stuff can become evil very quickly. It could go in a very negative direction very quickly. What are your thoughts on just like ethics, rules, rules, parameters, controls that probably do need to be put in place? I understand that if you are too harsh in your learnings and in your supervision, it could have negative effects in other directions. But like, what are the parameters to say, like, we need to stay within these kind of key walls to make sure things don't go absolutely off the rails?
You know, that's interesting. I think there's a lot of things that'll turn people's profit models. You know, you could make the cynic bot anytime you wanted to, who just said mean things, right? And I don't think that's a real danger to humanity, other than it's just a cynical bot. I think people would stop using it because it's negative a lot, unless you found it funny, right? Who knows? Maybe that's the one that goes viral now. Don't bet on humanity to always do the right thing, right? I think where things could actually get dangerous is along the lines of self-replication. Like once you lose the off switch, once you lose the ability to insert your supervised learning, right? Because you lost control of the cluster and it replicated itself over here, and now it's running, it has its own followers and whatever else, right? I think that's kind of a sci-fi thing still for now. You know, that's more of a Skynet sort of deal where you can't shut off the computer. But as long as you control, as long as you're paying the power bill where the computers are located, right, it's going to do whatever you want. It's going to sound the way you want it to sound. And I think people will be quite rational in the way they deploy it. They'll try not to get the mob out with pitchforks and torches to come after it, right?
Got it. Well, last question for you here, and then we can hop over and start kind of talking about some of my thoughts on this as well. We're talking about investment upside and looking for things like supervised learning, real machine learning, having an actual revenue model in place. These are some of the key fundamentals you're looking for when considering an investment. The other day, Chegg went down. Chegg is a public stock, right? It's like a learning tool for students in school, and their stock plummeted 40% because they kind of came out and said that their business is actually on a downward trend because of AI. And frankly, I think probably in a not so good way, students are just using AI to write their papers and study for their tests and do all these things, which is a little bit scary. but it's having a very negative implication on their business. So when you think about investor downside, what are some of the businesses that you think people should just be aware of that could really be negatively hampered, the incumbents at least, who don't adopt quickly to AI?
Well, it's interesting. AI, everyone said, oh man, it's going to replace the warehouse worker, right? Some robot's going to come into it. It's going to replace the long haul truck driver, right? That's just mindless staring out the window, right? The computer can do that. And that's not becoming the case at all, right? Like I said, medical advice, legal advice, write my research paper, right? It's the white collar, highly narrowly trained individual that's a lot easier to replace with this. The truck driver has to be able to handle a rainy night when the sheriff department puts up cones because the bridge is out, right? Get out and talk to the guy and figure out the best workaround that's not on Google Maps because the local knows the area. And then he has to back the big rig out without jackknifing it, right? And all that sort of thing, right? He has to get out and change the tire, right? There's these edge cases for the other stuff, for the broader applications of, loading the box at the warehouse or whatever else that humans do pretty well. But when you get to these really narrow fields, like explain to me the fine points of intellectual property law, right? There's not a lot of room for the computer to go off the rails there, right? It's a very deep dive, but it's got bounds on it, right? Yeah. And so those might be the ones that get replaced first. In terms of which companies that ends up hitting, I don't know. And again, like I said, I don't know what the allergic response is going to be, right? When lawyers get together and say, hey, this thing can't give legal advice. And the little disclaimer at the bottom that says this is not legal advice is not good enough because we're finding it in contracts, right? And by the way, it's very easy to spot. There's tools online you can copy and paste text into and say, hey, was this paper written by a kid or by AI? Was this contract written by a lawyer or by AI, right? And it gives you a pretty binary bifurcated probability score. It's usually like 99% or 1%, right? There's not many 50-50s in between.
Yep, completely. No, I couldn't agree more with you. Awesome. Well, happy to kind of walk through. If we go down a couple slides to
Yeah. I just want to say I better tell my kid he could be found out at any time.
At any time. It's copy and paste into any one of a bazillion online tools.
Yep. Okay. So here we go. Oops. All right. So Chris.
Someone's going to write an obfuscation engine next, right? That takes the output and then makes it look human again.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So Rick, it's your turn. Take it away with quizzes.
So Chris, you got a great checklist here. I think these are 7 excellent points. I'm going to go through them with you. So tell us what you like about the deep and proprietary training data.
Yeah, well, it's certainly self-serving, right? Because Kingscrowd, we are a deep proprietary database. What I think is important is it's just like anything else, right? And we've been talking about it for years and years and years, which is crap data in, crap outcomes out, right? So if you're feeding a system bad data, it's just like, if you're putting bad food into you, you're not going to perform well. So it's the exact same thing. You need really quality data in order to train these models intelligently. So if you're trying to create a new investment AI tool, well, if you're using really bad investment data and it's either inaccurate or it's just, poor data set that has a lot of gaps, well, it's going to learn from that. We're still talking about this fact that we do control the bot to some degree. And as long as we control the bot, it's what we're putting into its system is what it's going to ultimately spit out. So for me, it's really important that the quality of the data that you're creating, that you're then feeding into an AI bot, is of the highest quality and highest integrity, so that when it starts spitting out outcomes based off of that they're actually accurate outcomes, right? So for instance, I think 2 good examples, one on investments and one on cars. Like Tesla was feeding it really poor data of what it looks like when, cars are on the road around it. Well, then it might start, being inaccurate, right? And leading to crashes because it thinks, oh, if 3 inches, right, if it was feeding it that 6 inches apart, a car is actually 3 inches, then they might collide because it thinks it's 6 inches apart, but it's only 3 inches. So that needs to be accurate data in order to make sure that the models are actually trained correctly and have good outcomes. Same thing with if you're creating an investment AI model. Well, if you're feeding it really bad data that's completely inaccurate, then it's going to base the outcomes on that because it's still learning from what you're telling it. So if you tell it the wrong things, it's going to do the wrong things. So anyway, all of that is to say, having really good, clean, quality, high level data is very, very important so that we're training these bots to do the right things.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember a conversation I had a half decade ago with someone at a startup event who said, Tesla's going nowhere with self-driving. It's going to be Ford and Mercedes and everyone else. I said, why? Tesla's got all this great data around it. And they said, oh yeah, but the ABS system, everything else knows all the steering wheel inputs and all the braking inputs. I'm like, yeah, but doesn't know what's triggering those inputs. Like Tesla's putting cameras on all the cars. Like they're going to have all the other half of this data set and these other guys aren't, right? I think that's trying to be the case. I think it's exactly to your point. You got to have this deep proprietary training data or you don't have a lot to train off of. I think it's very true.
Frankly, there's the next one, Rick, like high precision accuracy and predictive analytics. It's getting to the same thing, right? Which is, again, whatever you're feeding it, that's ultimately what's going to happen. So for instance, if you just go back, let's say 8 years for a financial training model, 8 years, you're in a bull market, right? So then your investment model learns that, oh, the times are always good. Like, no, you probably need to through 08, through the dot-com bubble, through the 1929 crisis, right? Let's go all the way back. And then, by the way, it's probably not enough to just provide the financial data and what happened to the financial markets. You probably need to be feeding it news. So it can know like, oh, when these major events happen, these types, right? Whether it's classified as a war, whether it's classified as, an environmental issue, whatever it is, that all of these factors play a role. So it can really start being intelligent and nuanced. Because again, if you're giving it a narrow window and it's like, oh, this is predictive analytics based on what I know, in a short window, that could really, really be messed up.
You got to make her watch The Big Short.
Exactly. Watch The Big Short. Absolutely.
I think that's absolutely spot on. What do you mean by data governance? You have comprehensive data governance here.
Yeah, well, I think what this boils down to for me is like at Kingscraft, for instance, we have 3 layers of kind of data quality checks before anything gets published. Because once you publish it, right, especially in this world, it could immediately become truth. And people think, well, that's the answer. And so you need to be sure that what you're putting out there is correct and trustworthy and all of that. And these are the types of things where if you don't have checks and balances in place to make sure the data you're putting into there is correct and accurate, you could end up with issues. It also goes to this whole like biases issue that I think you need to be careful about, which is if you just start feeding it CNN News as the answer to what's going on in politics, you're going to get a very different answer than if you feed it Fox News. But what's probably going to work best is if you have CNN and Fox and NPR and all of the data sources, both conservative, non-conservative, liberal, whatever it may be. So you start get a blending that says like, hey, here's all the vast viewpoints, and thus somewhere in the middle is X, Y, and Z. So you need to make sure that what's being provided to that AI bot is comprehensive, is thoughtful, and again, has those correct checks and balances. What was it? There was a story not that long ago that basically someone at one of these large firms had started to feed this AI bot like a bunch of incorrect information as well. Like it found a back door and was inputting incorrect information that was completely messing up. I think it was like a financial advisor or something, like was using this AI bot, and it started providing these horrific recommendations to their clients. And it's like, you need to make sure that everything is buttoned up, including, by the way, probably more than ever, putting real walls and barriers around your data and making sure your cybersecurity stuff is in place. Because if people come for your data utilizing an AI bot that's trained to get through all these different cybersecurity measures, you could also have a real issue on your hand because it could be disseminated, data could be disseminated quicker than ever. And that's a real danger in and of itself. So basically, I think what's happening is that we're moving to a world where, like, especially if you're a technology company, what you are at your core is some sort of database. And that proprietary database is what's going to enable you to build really cool solutions off the top of it using these AI bots. And you got to make sure that you protect the hell out of your database.
That's a good point. Microsoft Tay, my previous example, had no data protection. It was actually soliciting input from anywhere it could get it. And it went off the rails pretty quick. So absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say that if we give this 10 more minutes so we could open it up for Q&A.
Okay. I'll pick up the pace here. So tell us what you think about computing power.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, the quicker this stuff can be trained, and by that I mean these AI bots can be trained on larger data sets and more information, from my perspective, you're going to be the ones who have the best bots out there, right? The ones who could pass the bar exam faster, who could solve the case faster, whatever it may be. Having more computing power on your side should be beneficial. I will say my mind has been slightly changed on this just from Sam Altman recently talking about like, they don't really plan to make their models bigger than they already are today. And I think we're also going to see a lot of kind of offsite AI powered technology solutions where maybe you don't need the computing power in-house to enable it. But I do think, you know, as we're creating proprietary models and trying to create our own proprietary bots, companies that have more computing power are going to be better positioned to have ones that really work well.
Yeah, this might be a pioneers versus settlers thing. I think the pioneers need it. I'm not sure the settlers do. All right. Yeah, IP protectable models.
Yeah, so this is taking a little bit of the Apple, you know, concept over the Android concept, right? Some people think all of it should be completely open source and anybody can access it. And it's really what you do with it that matters. From my perspective, like I said, I think some of the biggest companies of the next decade are going to essentially be database companies that mask as AI companies. And AKA, they're going to have these really smart proprietary databases that they build really cool tools off of with the AI bots. And so for me, if you protect that, if you have your proprietary data set, there's a ton of value to be had in creating a very premium offering, a very high margin offering, because no one else has access to that data other than you, rather than open sourcing it and then anyone can build stuff off of it, which could be scalable, obviously, but at the same time, I think the higher margin businesses will be those that really kind of control their own data sets.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I mentioned Oracle before. They needed a ton of money in the .com boom, right? But they're not the most popular database by any means right now. That's all open source alternatives. Doesn't mean Larry Ellison isn't laughing all the way to the bank and his shareholders haven't done great off of it, right? You know, Levi's, the jean company in San Francisco, it's around from the gold rush in California, right? Yeah. It was selling jeans and shovels and tools and stuff to all the miners who showed up, and it's still around and all the mining's over. So yeah, there can be something there. I'm of two minds on that one. I think open source wins in the end. I think you make a big pile of money with closed source in the interim. Adaptable, modifiable interfaces with quality user experience.
So this kind of comes down to like, you know, there's a lot of technologies out there right now that are getting extremely excited about AI. But if I've learned anything from being around technologists for the last 10 years of my career, it's that oftentimes they're really excited to solve problems that no one has. And at the end of the day, you still need to solve a problem that people have, which goes to the unique and monetizable use cases as well, which is concept of like, yeah, it's cool to think about applying AI to a multitude of different problems, but you still need to ask, is there someone who's willing to pay for that? Will find that useful, helpful, and valuable. And frankly, I've seen a lot, especially in recent weeks, of people building really cool, fun stuff, but it has absolutely no monetizable real value. And so you still need to think about who's going to pay for this? What is their problem? How am I solving it with AI? And if you're not doing those things, then what you're building is a really worthless, but very cool technology. But it doesn't matter. We need solutions that can actually make money. So you need to be looking at, will this company actually be able to generate money by solving a problem for someone who is willing to pay to solve that problem?
I'd say this is my revenue model bullet with different words. I love it. Yep,
that's
absolutely.
Exactly right. I was going to say the same thing. Yep.
All right. And then lastly, unique monetizable use cases.
Yeah. So that's, you know, going to this issue of like, is someone willing to pay for this? And if they're not, then it's simply not worth doing, right? Like you probably don't need an AI powered, you know, I don't know, chef or something, right? Like this just don't make sense. But we're seeing these things pop up and people are talking about them. And it's like, no.
Pets.com all over again.
Exactly.
Love it. All right. Well, I think we agree more than we disagree. Lauren, do we have a score sheet at the end here?
Yeah. So it looks like you all agree with most of it. Rick, I think you disagreed on the computing power. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that one that was coming from Chris?
Yes, on the computing power side of things, I think it's foundational right now, that computing power. A Series A seed round company couldn't do it, right? A Series C seed round company couldn't do it. It takes a company like Facebook or Google or Microsoft or IBM to say, hey, we got this, multi-billion-dollar market cap, and we're investing heavily in this for a period of time, right? And I think that's what's happened. OpenAI is interesting. It kind of came out of left field, but it had a good capital foundation. It got to a revenue model pretty quickly. And I think that's going to continue to be the trend. I think computing power is going to become less and less important, and even just not even notable anymore in the not too distant future. I think all the tools and stuff will be out there, and anyone can jump on. And just like anyone could build a website back in the day, anyone will be able to build their AI.
I just want to note that I'm noticing that the deep proprietary training data that you mentioned, Chris, the high precision accuracy, and the data governance. We'll update this slide for all of you guys when we send it out to you for those in attendance. But those three are not here. But I'm assuming, Rick, you agree with fundamentally those 3 points.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. All right, Chris. So if we look at Rick's, it looks like the company owning the customer was one that you didn't quite agree with. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this just comes down to a couple of things. One, Rick was mentioning before, like there's kind of a lot of middlemen out there. First off, I think a lot of the middlemen in this industry will be able to make a lot of money. And then the second thing is, again, comes back to this idea of proprietary databases and the idea that like you might not even need to own a customer or own the end solution, but having a proprietary database that people are paying for to train their own bots or whatever it may be. I think there's a lot of flexibility in what the future of a customer looks like based on this new kind of AI intelligence model. So I just think there's like a lot of new monetizations and business models that will be had that we don't even know yet. And so I think that actually changes the paradigm of what the customer company interaction looks like.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think, like I said, Oracle made a ton of money, even though they're not the most popular database anymore, right? There's a time window in which that middleware can do really well. And we might be in it right now.
Totally.
All right. I think that ends the presentation part. Very exciting. I know we could go on for another hour or so probably on these points, but let's open it up to Q&A. You guys could put all those in attendance, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A so that our panelists can kind of take a look at that and answer them as they come in. All right, so Rick, I'm assuming you can see the Q&A. Do you want to kick us off with some of the Q&A questions?
Would you agree that Tesla is one of the greatest AI companies in the world? I would agree with that. Artificial intelligence has a lot of definitions and it's always changing. I think one of the earliest examples of AI all of our grandparents lived with, which was the thermostat, right? A thermostat has two artificially intelligent thoughts. Either it's warm enough in here or it's not warm enough in here, right? And it turns the heat on appropriately. And that used to take a human to go do that, right? After that became totally normalized, that's not really considered AI anymore by most people, but I think it fits the definition. I think what Tesla's doing with the computer vision side is amazing. They went to their own silicon stack. They didn't go with NVIDIA or AMD or whatever. They built their own stuff that's highly specialized for what they do. They've got massive amounts of data, right? Once they put cameras in all the cars, they have, what the drivers are doing at all times based upon that. Oh, look, a dog. Let me turn this way, right? Oh, there's a flashing red sign, so I go that way, right? I'm going to hit the brakes now because of what I see out the windshield. And the computers are following along and learning from that massive data set. And that's just probably in terms of petabytes of information digested, they may be the biggest because video data is really big. They may be the greatest. It's hard to say. I'm looking at some other ones in here. Applications built using OpenAI's GPT as the major component of the back end, are they worthy to be invested in or should they be considered as original ideas? Yeah, okay, so that's a really great question. So the question is, chat, if you build something at Chat GPT, is that worth investing in? And I say right now, yes. And the reason is, this is very much like the web 1.0.com revolution, right? you're building it instead of building it on Apache web server, Solaris, and Oracle, right? Those are pretty common stack back in the day. You're building on ChatGPT, right? And maybe you had some framework out there. I think people right now, they build websites on Ruby on Rails or on any of the JavaScript platforms that seem to be competing. One takes over from the other. I think there's a lot of great tools out there that people have built really, really valuable businesses on top of. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, how about Chris? What's your thought?
Yeah, well, to go even further back in time, like way back to the Industrial Revolution, right? It's like Ford, for instance, creates the production line, right, for cars. And it's like, well, everyone else who came after them, it's like, well, are they really valuable? They didn't invent these, these robots and these different things that they can use for the production line. But guess what? All of these massive car companies were built on top of it. And frankly, the entire consumer packaged good industry was built on top of it, right? This idea of mass production came about because of that. And it's like, basically, there was kind of the creation of machines and then the application machines. And the application machines is probably as valuable or more valuable than the actual creation of the machine. So I think the things built on top of it are actually going to be, in many ways, much more valuable than just the bot or the tool that's been created through ChatGPT. So yeah, I think any company that's smart enough to leverage it and is doing it in a unique way that solves a real problem that people are willing to pay for, those are going to be the companies that win and do exceptionally well.
Yep, I agree completely. And I think right now, it doesn't really matter, right? When Amazon first started, didn't matter where they hosted their website or what technology they did it on. Long term, though, Amazon became so valuable because they built that back end so well that they even started renting it out as AWS, et cetera, right? But right now at the beginning, it's a land grab. Get out there, find the thing that you can do better than anyone else using these new tools. Do it and stake your claim.
Here's a question. Who are the leading or emerging AI startups to consider for investment? A few people have asked.
I'm going to give that to Chris. This is what King's Crowd does, right?
Yeah, you know what? So that your best bet on that, because frankly, there's a lot of them and they're coming out all the time. What I would recommend to you, go to kingscrowd.com, and we do have a coupon code for folks called AI30, which will allow you to access all of our reports and everything for a month free. And if you go there and you use our company search table, go to companies, company search, and you could search and filter for those companies, and you'll find the whole list of all the actively raising companies. You could dig into their financials, all of their metrics, and really get a good landscape of what's going on in the market. So highly, highly recommend you go to kingscrowd.com and check that out.
I like it. So besides Cloudastructure, of course, which I'm sure is the best one. Any others come to mind?
Let's see. Let me pull up a couple here. Yeah, I was just having a conversation with one. So there's some really interesting cybersecurity companies that are starting to apply this technology. I've been talking to a couple of them recently. I'm gonna have to pull up the names. I will get the two names that I've been.
We'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, no problem.
You said something when we were talking about using AI for hacking. That would work really well, actually, right? I mean, there's all the pen test stuff you could go through, followed by all the SQL injection exploits or everything else, right? It could just run the whole gamut for you and then say, do you want it to take the site down? Do you want to steal their data? Do you want to do a ransomware? Like, what do you want to do with it, right? Like, kind of fascinating what you could do with a large language model type of AI as a hacking tool.
And in a much more boring category, there's a couple of new accounting companies coming out that I think could really rival or kill QuickBooks over the next several years if they don't adapt. One of them is run by this guy, Sasha Orloff, that I know very well from several years ago from another startup he was doing. And he has this new accounting company that it's amazing. I mean, it can really break down all of your accounting stuff and like automatically identify everything. But a lot of them have said they do that, but it was more the Mechanical Turks doing it. This is like truly automated financial accounting that's kind of scary good. And again, I'm going to have to look up the company's name, but there's some really exciting developments in that market, and that's a very big market.
Here's a fun one. Will AI become our walking, talking robot friends?
So will he be turned into humanoid or dog form? Yeah, eventually for sure, right? We've seen it in sci-fi since Battlestar Galactica had Boxy or whatever, right? The robot dog. Everyone wants the robot dog, robot romantic partner, whatever, right? Like we know it's coming for better or worse, right? It'll be here.
Well, I don't know if you saw on CNBC the other day, one of the anchors on the show had a full conversation with a person about, the financial industry, and it was an AI bot. It wasn't a real person that he was talking to. And if you didn't know better, you would think he was talking to a real person. So yeah, it's definitely coming.
It's definitely coming. The deep fake videos and everything on top of it, doing that stuff online, I think is already here, right?
Yeah, it's a little scary.
All right, so this question for Rick or Chris, actually. Do you know anything about Google Chat that's based on a different model? So in contrary to the ChatGPT that we've seen.
I know everyone's working on it, Google included, right? I think Silicon Valley was a little bit asleep at the wheel. Facebook ran off and was changed their name to Meta to do the metaverse, I think because Mark Zuckerberg probably finally read Snow Crash, right? A 25-year-old sci-fi book about exactly what he was trying to build. It was even called the metaverse in that book. And so I think just we kind of missed it, right? I think this whole large language model, passing the Turing test in a whole new way, chatbot just caught everyone by surprise. And you see it. I mean, Google just merged their 3 different AI businesses into one unit under single leadership. I think they're desperate at the founder and board level to get control of it and make sure that they're the ones who play this. I mean, think about it. Why would you go to Google and start typing in search terms with pluses and minus signs to go what you're looking for when you can just say, hey, what's the best stereo for me, right? or other just simple sort of questions, hey, how do I write this contract or whatever, right? Like, that's what Google's supposed to do. They're supposed to provide all the humans all the information, right? And if it's just a search bar that you can put 6 words or something into, right? It spits out a bunch of website links. That's very different than what's happening right now. And it's adapt or die for them, right?
A question for Chris on King's Crowd. How long will King's Crowd offering be open? And are you going to have another fundraising round for retail investors?
Yeah, great question. So we don't have an offering open right now. And will we have ones in the future? I'd say the answer is yes. We don't have a timeline for when we're going to be doing our next raise, but we're huge believer. We've done, I think, 4 raises now from the public and from our own customers. We have 4,000 investors who are our own customers. So we're obviously massive believers and want to continue to do so. We're in a weird time right now. We're kind of sitting on the sidelines at the moment, just seeing what's kind of going to play out in the financial markets. But I would imagine that come the next couple of years, certainly keep your eyes out, and I'm sure we'll do another raise.
One question on who we bank with. For those of you who might be concerned, we bank with Chase and Wells Fargo, who are in the top 5, so no concerns there.
And the funny thing is, my background in Silicon Valley with venture-backed startups, I used to bank with Silicon Valley Bank, right? And CloudStructure did way back in the day, and they just got so frustrating to work with. We moved to Chase, half decade ago or something. So
awesome.
Yeah. Let's see here. I think we're sort of running out of time. We just have a few minutes, and we have some closing slides. We'll see if there are any questions unanswered, and hopefully write them in the follow-up, email that we'll send to all of you. So. One question that people are speaking to, though, is, about our raise, Rick, and we've had our Reg A open for a while. Is it going to stay open? We've had a bunch of questions on that. Can you just speak to the PQA that's going on right now?
Yeah, so I believe our raise is open at least until May 19th. Reg A pluses are good for a year. You have to do what's called a PQA, post-qualification amendment. We may not have that done in time. We may not get it qualified, so it may not reopen after the 19th. We're not sure. We'd like it to, we're aiming to do that, but at least by all indications right now, we can never guarantee anything. It looks like we'll be open at least till the 19th. So almost a couple weeks, week and a half, or yeah, a couple weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks, 2 weeks in a day. There we go. I can do math.
Okay, so if you want to learn more about Cloudastructure, you can go to our invest.cloudastructure.com website, or simply put buycloudshares.com. And also Chris is offering, you want to speak to this, Chris?
Yep. So as I mentioned earlier, if you use coupon code AI30 at kingscrowd.com, you just click on the sign up page. In the sign up flow, you could go to Edge or Edge Pro account. Edge Pro is the one that I would sign up for because you get 30 days free on it. It's $49.99 a month, but you get it free right now for 30 days. And that'll get you full access to the entire Kingscrowd platform to look at every rating and analytics page for every company that's raising capital right now online. So really interesting investment opportunities out there, and you'll be able to assess all of them. So AI30, put that in the coupon code when you're checking out, and you'll have it free for 30 days.
Yeah, and we all get King's Crowd newsletter. It's fantastic. So I recommend that you guys take advantage of this opportunity. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Rick, for an exciting conversation and about AI investments. Hopefully we'll all make some more money as a result of all this. We will be following up with a PDF that summarizes your key points for those of you who might want to digest it again, as well as a recording of this webinar. And hopefully you'll join us next month, June 15th, for Breaking Down the Barriers, Crypto, AI, and Crowdfunding. We will have Cloudastructure as a Reg A company, one of the most successful Reg A fundraisers in 2021, as well as HydroHash, which is a crypto company, speaking about their raise, and we'll talk about the nuances of Reg A and CFs and good stuff for investors to know. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for your participation, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Chris. It was a lot of fun.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.